Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Astrology News Report, an alternate view of world events as seen through the lens of Vedic astrology, presented by yours truly, Ron Berger. Today is April 22nd, 2018. In this segment, we'll take a look at the week that was and see how the planets' patterns in the zodiac matched up with the past week's events. It's been a rough week for the president and his associates. During mid-April, Saturn is stationary in the zodiac as it begins a retrograde period. Stationary Saturn is extra strong for what it represents. Saturn is the reality check planet, the planet of the establishment, planet of restriction and suffering. And Saturn is directly aspecting Donald Trump's natal Mercury, his planet of communications, in his 11th house of friends and associates. Yes, Lordy, there are, in fact, tapes. Since Mr. Trump doesn't email, his attorney, his Consigliere, Michael Cohen, had to resort to recordings to keep all the complicated instructions and decisions straight. Now, those recordings are in the hands of the FBI. Uh-oh, this does not look good. The president's personal lawyer and friend fixer is now under federal criminal investigation for everything from violating campaign finance laws to income tax evasion to wire fraud. And all of the president's horses and all the president's men are scrambling like mad to keep the shit from sticking to Mr. Big himself. And what exactly is the stinky stuff that they don't want everyone to know about? Stay tuned. With this many investigators snooping around, surely we won't have too much longer to wait. What's the Vedic astrology angle on all this? Let's review a few salient points about Mr. Trump's birth chart. First off, he's Leo rising. Leo is the sign of the king. The king doesn't operate alone. He needs trusted lieutenants, and that brings up the trust factor. Very important for Leo, which leads us to another crucial point. Leo is subject to betrayal. Right now, the assumption coming from every pundit's lips is that, faced with maybe a couple of decades of jail time, Mr. Cohen will flip on Trump and become a prosecution witness. Another interesting item in Trump's chart is his natal moon in Scorpio at the end of the sign. Scorpio is the sign of secrets, secret actions, having secret agendas, secret affairs. And the last sector of Scorpio is Jesta, a lunar sign, noted for needing a confidant, someone to tell the secret to. In Vedic astrology, the planet that signifies advice and advisors is Venus, which is also lawyers. Trump's natal Venus resides in his 12th house, the house of loss and expense, and of hidden actions, subversion, and conspiracies. Note, too, that Venus is closely conjunct Saturn, the planet that represents the 6th house, the house of struggle and difficulties. The 6th house is also enemies, and even litigation. So we can see that Trump has a natal setup that can result in difficulty and loss from advisors and from litigation. Speaking of the 6th house, starting on May 2nd, Mars, planet of combat, will be transiting through this part of Trump's chart for 6 months. Mars will team up with transiting Ketu, one of the eclipse points. These two significators together are quite incendiary. They form a particularly nasty astrology combination, which, especially in the 6th house, indicates things spiraling out of control, here in his house of struggle, enemies, and litigation. So, the future is not looking good for Donald Trump. Mercury is no longer retrograde since April 15th, but Mercury is still in sidereal Pisces, its sign of debilitation. The reason Mercury is weakened in Pisces is because the planet's natural, rational nature is compromised in the sign of feelings, hope, and faith. Mercury, as the planet of evaluating facts and data and making rational decisions, tends to be unrealistic while in Pisces. Over the past week, there have been further developments towards a Trump-Kim Jong Un summit meeting, which suggests that this historic sit-down may actually happen. If it does, it would be big news. But let's not get too Piscean about this. Both leaders want to get something out of it. Each has an agenda, where a political gain would be just as important as anything real. Remember that not even a year ago they were hurling insults at each other, so the turnaround is quite notable. What happened to change Kim's mind? The theory is that the punishment of the UN economic sanctions against North Korea have had an effect. Note that Mars and Saturn, a planetary combination that manifests as punishment, has been in play for the last 2 months, and while transiting in the USA chart's ascendant, affects the 7th house of direct opponents. Will the two leaders be able to broker an accord that settles over 5 decades of strife? An interesting development in the zodiac recently is that Venus, the planet of compromise and agreement, just went into Taurus. This is helpful, since Venus in its own sign is strong, and Taurus is a sign devoted to tangible material gain. But it's a short-lived transit, only lasting until May 14th, so the window of opportunity is brief. Pundits aren't convinced anything will happen beyond a lot of posturing. For the last week, there's been a lot of media reporting on James Comey and his new book, A Higher Loyalty. The ex-FBI head has sought to seize the moral high ground, going so far as to accuse Donald Trump of being morally unfit to be president. An interesting astrological angle on this is that the planet of law, morals, ethics, and truth is Jupiter. Jupiter is now retrograde, going backwards in the zodiac, thus going back over the past, which is what Mr. Comey is doing with his recollections of his interactions with the president before he was fired. Jupiter is in Libra, a sign associated with fairness and idealism. Okay, that's all the time I have for this week. And now I have a small favor to ask. It does take a lot of time, effort, and work to produce these videos. If you appreciate what this YouTube channel does for you, please help keep it and me going by visiting the donation page and making a contribution. Just click on or touch the donation card you see here. Thanks, and until next week.